Yo, behavior modification. This term gets thrown around the dog training world quite a bit. There's a lot to it, there's a lot of jargon, and I want you to have a solid understanding so you can make truly informed decisions with your dog. Let's go. Using my 34 years of professional dog training experience, I'm helping you better educate yourself so you can make better choices when training and raising your pet dog. This is Dog French Kisses. Welcome to Dog French Kisses. This video is about behavior modification. Before we get started, I want to address the thumbnail. If you are already pretty familiar with the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning, then you may have seen the thumbnail and thought,
hey, the plus and the minus come after.
And this is true. And I did it on purpose as a little clickbait for people who already know.
Sorry.
But if you're all new to this stuff, it reads a little easier to see the symbol before the letter, like positive then reinforcement instead of reinforcement positive. Not a big deal either way, but the correct way is to write the R or the P in the front. Also, before we get started, the term behavior modification gets thrown around sometimes in ways that might give people the wrong impression. When you boil it down, anything that's changing behavior is behavior modification. We're modifying their behavior, right? But most of the work done in dog training falls under the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. I hear behavior modification used as specifically dealing with behavior issues, as in modifying unwanted behaviors. And for sure, that's part of it. But any so-called basic obedience is definitely going to be behavior modification too. And like I said, really, it's all modifying behavior. I have 3 goals in my training that encompass everything I'll ever want to do. And this is just my thing here. I'm not saying any of it's original. It's just how I break it all down. So goal 1, establish and maintain behavior. Goal 2, stop behavior. And the third one, goal 3, is make the dog feel good about something. So with goal 1, getting behaviors I want and getting them to continue. Goal 2, unwanted behaviors that I want to get rid of. And goal 3, the dog doesn't like something and I want to change that. Or maybe it just doesn't have any experience. So these could be fear or reactivity or just general socialization. So as I've been saying, there are 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is conditioning behaviors. Most people think that it's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. That's only half of it. And most people don't even really know what those terms mean. Something for you to consider. If someone is training dogs professionally and they're not very familiar with the stuff we're about to go over, that's a huge problem. So we have reinforcement and punishment, and each has both a positive and a negative, giving us 4 quadrants. It's important to know none of this is inherently good or bad. They're not nice or mean. There are certainly implications for the dog's learning, and our relationship with the dog. And that'll play out with the methods that we use to either reinforce or punish. But reinforcement and positive do not mean good, and punishment and negative do not mean bad. Reinforcement is increasing the likelihood a certain behavior will occur. So this is either getting a behavior to happen or making it happen more often. Punishment is decreasing the likelihood a certain behavior will occur. So that's either stopping a behavior from happening or making it happen less often. And then positive is simply adding something, negative is simply removing something, addition and subtraction. So in order to get behavior or stop behavior, we're going to have to add or subtract something. And simply put, that is either something the dog likes or doesn't like. Or another way to say it is something the dog will seek out or seek to avoid. So some examples of all 4 quadrants. So for reinforcement, let's say I'm trying to get my dog to sit. And I'm either going to use positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement to reinforce my dog sitting. So for positive reinforcement, let's say I ask my dog to sit, his butt hits the ground, and as soon as it hits the ground, I give him a treat. Adding the treat to reinforce the behavior of putting the butt on the ground. For negative reinforcement, let's say I have an e-collar on my dog's neck. I ask my dog to sit, I hold the button on the e-collar down, shocking the dog. His butt hits the ground. As soon as his butt hits the ground, I release the button. I'm taking something away to reinforce the dog sitting, taking away that shock with the collar as soon as the butt hits the ground. Now for punishment, let's say that the dog is jumping up and I don't want the dog to do that, so I want to punish that behavior. So for positive punishment, the dog jumps up, I knee him in the chest, the dog stops jumping up. I've added something to the situation to stop that behavior. And for negative punishment, the dog jumps up, I remove my attention, which is what the dog wants, the dog stops jumping. I've taken something away from the situation that the dog wants in order to punish that behavior. I said it in my last video, if you're like me, this stuff is super confusing at first. Rewatch the video, look it up online, find the resource that works for you, and go over it until you get it. These are just 4 examples that I happen to use for 2 different behaviors that we're trying to teach, or really a behavior that we're trying to reinforce and a behavior that we're trying to stop. Reinforcement is when we want to get something, punishment is when we want to stop something. 2 very important things to know. 1, outcome is more important than intention. We may intend to reinforce or punish a behavior, but if our technique isn't good or our reinforcer or punisher isn't strong enough, we may not actually be doing the work that we're intending to do. And even if we're right on point with the game plan, the dog decides. They don't literally make a decision, but how the situation plays out determines if the behavior was actually reinforced or punished, not what we're trying to do. For example, if I ask my dog to do something and it does it, and I want to reinforce that with a treat, but I walk over to the kitchen to get the treat and then give it to the dog 30 seconds later, that's way too late for the dog to connect my reinforcer with the behavior. I'm intending to use positive reinforcement, but the technique isn't good in this scenario because of the slow timing. Or let's say my timing is perfect, but the dog doesn't like the treat. It's not going to reinforce the behavior if the dog doesn't like the treat. That brings us to the second important thing to know. If you are doing everything right with either your reinforcement or your punishment and it's not working, you need to increase the intensity. Your reinforcer or punisher needs to be stronger. Now, I'm not advocating for or against any of the following, but some examples of this might be changing to a tastier food or turning to a higher setting on an e-collar or play or being released instead of food, or maybe just yelling louder or popping the leash harder. But make sure not to increase intensity until you've made sure that your technique is on point, your criteria, your movement, your timing. Because if you just make your reinforcer or punisher stronger without good technique, you're still not going to get there and you might get some unwanted outcome, whether that's big or small. Now, when you start to get deeper into this stuff, you'll find that there's a couple links between the quadrants. Positive reinforcement and negative punishment are linked, and positive punishment and negative reinforcement are linked. And what I mean is, when you're going to positively reinforce, but you haven't given it yet because the dog hasn't done the behavior, that might technically be negative punishment. And in order to negatively reinforce, you technically have to add a positive punisher before you remove it.
What?
And if this is all too much, just ignore this part for now. Like I said, it's getting even deeper. But once you're understanding the links that I just talked about, that's when you're really getting it. Now, do you even need to know any of this stuff? Is this stuff too basic for modern training? Are we getting stuck in the quadrants and not considering the full picture, not being practical? These are all questions that are put out in the world, and I think they're legit to consider. Here's how I see it. This stuff is the basics, the foundation. If you want to understand behavior change, if you want to be able to adapt to what's not working, if you want to make informed decisions on what's ethical instead of just guessing or trusting, you need to have some understanding of this stuff. For example, I said we're adding or taking away either something the dog likes or something the dog doesn't like, or something the dog will seek or seek to avoid. That seek to avoid part is a very controversial topic that you should consider, perhaps the biggest topic in training. Something an animal will seek to avoid is called an aversive. What qualifies as an aversive and the use of aversives period are big discussions. Typically, positive punishment and negative reinforcement are going to utilize an aversive, and positive reinforcement and negative punishment will not. I'll dive into this mess in other videos, but for now, please be thorough in your learning. Another important debate, or really an important misunderstanding to educate yourself about, is the idea of using positive reinforcement to get rid of unwanted behaviors. As you now know, to stop behavior, we would need to punish, right? But what if we can figure out a way to reinforce the behaviors we want and just bypass the punishment? You may have heard people say that quote unquote all positive trainers just reinforce the good and ignore the bad. I do not recommend doing that, but I know what this idea is really getting at, and it's a very powerful method. The idea is to positively reinforce different behaviors in scenarios that we're getting unwanted ones. We can make those unwanted behaviors impossible or at least unlikely. It's called differential reinforcement, and there's a few ways to do it. So the ones that I've used are DRI, DRA, DRO, and DRL. And there's other ones too. I'm not going to get into them. Look into it if you want, but all you really need is a good example. If a dog is jumping up on you and you want to stop that behavior, you could punish it. And you've got two choices there, positive or negative. Or you can positively reinforce the dog keeping its feet on the ground. If it's actively keeping its feet on the ground, it can't be jumping. That's differential reinforcement. I strongly encourage you to wrap your head around this idea and apply it to your dog training. Why? Because it encourages a desired behavior instead of simply stopping what's undesirable. And it's simpler than punishing what's undesired and then reinforcing what is. One thing that bugs the shit out of me with dog trainers is the word reward. Reward is not one of the quadrants. A reward is something you earn for performance. Reinforcement is something that makes a behavior more likely to occur. They are not the same despite being used interchangeably all the time. A reinforcer may be a reward, but a reward is not necessarily a reinforcer. And this is not a hill I'm willing to die on. It's not the biggest deal. But if a trainer uses the word reward, I always raise an eyebrow. More importantly, if they don't know what a reinforcer is, huge problem. Okay, so some other methods and ideas. And I'm going to just briefly touch on each one of these. Generalization. Very important. You train your dog in your house or your yard and it's perfect, but it doesn't listen anywhere else. Why? Because you have to generalize the behavior. Perfect it, then do it with distraction, then more distraction, then in your neighborhood, then the park, then a friend's house, etc., etc. All the places you might take your dog. The more the merrier. And the more you do, the easier it'll be and the stronger that behavior will be. Extinction. Not reinforcing a behavior. If there's nothing reinforcing a behavior, it'll fade away. Maybe we've unintentionally reinforced a behavior that we don't like, and if we can recognize that and stop reinforcing it, it goes extinct. Or maybe there's something in the situation that's reinforcing behavior that we don't like, so if we can rearrange things, maybe physically or timing-wise, we can remove whatever is reinforcing that unwanted behavior. Shaping. Shaping means we positively reinforce pieces of a final behavior that we're looking for. If a behavior is advanced or we're just not getting the behavior, and so of course we're not reinforcing, the dog might get confused and or we're just never going to get there. So we reinforce a small part of the behavior and then we build on that until we're reinforcing more of the full behavior that we're looking for. I've gotten made fun of for using the term successive approximations in a beginner group class, and everybody stared at me like I was speaking a different language. Chaining. Chaining is like the macro version of shaping. Instead of putting together parts of a behavior, we're putting together behaviors that result in a sequence. A fun example is teaching your dog to get you a beer from the fridge. Not really a super advanced thing to train, but you got to train each part and then train and reinforce it all together. So you train a fetch and a fetch with the beer, opening the fridge, closing the fridge, and depending on the dog and the trainer, it could be more detailed than even the parts I just went over. Reinforcement schedules. This is how often you're positively reinforcing while you're teaching. Once a dog starts to get something, we can reinforce less often or randomly, and it actually strengthens the behavior. This is definitely a topic that gets deep, and I'm probably not going to cover it much more. But for example, maybe you reinforce every other time for a bit, and then every third, and then so on. And we can fade our reinforcements this way. This is what people cry about when they say if you use treats, then you'll always have to use treats. No, you don't. Or if you train your dog something and it's perfect without reinforcing, just reinforce it randomly here or there, and it'll help keep it going. Now, these next ones are very important ones that I will go over in detail in future videos. Habituation. This is a dog getting used to something that it used to react to. There's two main ways to do it, and one is clearly the better way to go. People out there will say otherwise, but let me explain. Flooding. Don't do this one. You already know the method. We see it all the time. I've done it. You've probably done it. It's forcing the dog to endure the situation. The tricky thing with flooding is it's 50-50, kinda. Depends on so many factors, but 50-50 is a terrible ratio in training. Either the dog learns the thing, the situation, whatever, is cool, or it fucking backfires and makes everything worse. Again, don't do this. Desensitization. This is the good one. This is gradually exposing the dog to something so it gets used to it. Baths, nail trims, vet visits, vacuums, new objects, sounds, etc., etc., etc. We go slow, we never overdo it, maybe we pair it with food, we quit while we're ahead. So the dog learns to enjoy or at least tolerate the thing instead of flipping out like so many dogs do. This is the better way. Counter conditioning. So this one is similar to desensitization. The dog has unfortunately been conditioned to respond to something in a way that we don't like. Maybe it's not our fault, shit happens, but our dog doesn't like something, gets reactive, gets aggressive, gets scared, freaks out. We can counter condition that response. We can work to reverse the way the dog feels about it. Or again, maybe we can at least make it more tolerable for the dog and reduce the unwanted behavior. All kinds of ins and outs here. That'll do it for this one, folks. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Watch my other videos and stay up.